Have you ever been to a funeral where at the end of the service there was a time for anybody who wanted to come up and share a memory? They were able to come to the microphone and share some stories. We sometimes call those stories that they tell eulogies. And I think that we should ask ourselves a question as to whether or not those are actually helpful to the funeral or if they distract from what's supposed to happen in a funeral. Hey folks, I'm Pastor Eric Tritten from Gloria Dei Lutheran Church in Hudson, Ohio, and this is a weekly word, and I'm glad you're with me. We're talking about funerals. It's important for us to think about what happens when somebody dies. How do we handle that as Christians? How do we worship God in that time of sorrow and sadness? Now, in a previous episode, one of the things that I talked about is that the content of a funeral is really about Jesus, not the person who's died. The person who's died is the context. We tell the story of Jesus' salvation in the context of the life of this sinner who has been redeemed by Jesus. Now, when I come to a funeral, and by come to a funeral, I mean that I'm the one who's conducting it and I'm preparing for it and all of those types of things. One of the hard parts of preparing for that funeral is to make sure that it is personal while it continues to point people to Jesus. You know, we want to talk about God's salvation through Christ in this person's story. And that story then is then talked about how Jesus has forgiven and redeemed that individual. And to make that happen, you kind of have to know the person's story. You have to know something about them. I'm not saying that you can't preach a funeral sermon and know nothing about the individual and just talk about Jesus. There are times where that's unfortunately kind of necessary. But on the whole, if I can, I want to spend some time with the family, get to know the person a little bit, hear the stories that they tell about them. And even if it's just a small part of it, something to kind of hook in and show this is how God has worked in this person's life. You know, I think that can be very helpful for people as they grieve and as they hear the story of what Jesus has done for their loved one. Now, again, as a pastor, I want to make sure that the funeral is personal, but it keeps the main thing the main thing. This is a worship service. I'm here to proclaim Christ. We're here to defy death and to proclaim the message of Jesus' salvation and his resurrection. Which brings me to another tradition around funerals, the eulogy. There's an ancient tradition around eulogies. The word eulogy in and of itself literally means a good word. And historically, a proper eulogy was an oration that was given by a prepared speaker who would praise the individual, and they would recount the individual's accomplishments and everything about him or her that was praiseworthy. The pastor does not give a eulogy at a funeral, or at least he shouldn't. The pastor is there to represent Jesus and to proclaim the message of his salvation and his defeat of death. His defeat of death for that person and for those who are gathered there too. So the pastor proclaims Christ's salvation for the dead sinner and offers that salvation to the congregation. That's really the work that I have to do at a funeral. And as you hear that, you might guess I'm not a big fan of eulogies, which I'm not. Although I have seen some that were done well. I'll admit that. But let me give you a few reasons why I tend to not like eulogies. Number one, they get the wrong emphasis. Notice that a eulogy is everything about the person that is praiseworthy. And I have heard eulogies where they talk about how great and wonderful the deceased is and how certain they are that that individual is in heaven or whatever else because they were so good. Meanwhile, I've just spent time through that whole service and through my sermon proclaiming that the wages of sin is death. This person died because they're a sinner, and their hope is not in the good works that they've done, but in Jesus' salvation. It really cuts against the main point of a funeral. The emphasis is in the wrong place in most eulogies. Number two, bad theology. I have heard people speak in eulogies talking about how God just needed another angel in heaven. First of all, when we die, we don't become angels. We are people, not the same thing. And we will continue to be people, even in the resurrection. And the angels were created to serve us. So if you die and you become an angel, you just kind of took a demotion, so to speak. And the other one that really gets at me is, I'm sure that he or she is in heaven because she led such a good life. No. If their life was so good, the person wouldn't have died. The wages of sin is death. It's the consequence. And we're seeing it right there. The only way that death is overcome is by Jesus and his death and his resurrection. And that's the actual hope. Not that they were good enough to get in, but Jesus was good enough to get them in. And in his love, he gives everlasting life to those who trust in him. So the third reason that I really don't like eulogies, well, we'll just call it poor performance. When you look at what people are really kind of obsessed with or fearful of, there are about 10% of people who go through life with a unhealthy fear of death. Now, that might not seem like too many, okay? About 75% of people have a fear of speaking in public. That's a lot. And so we're going to say this person who may or may not have a fear of speaking in public is then going to get up and give a speech. And a lot of times people don't know how to prepare for that moment. And friends, failure to prepare is preparing to fail. And so they kind of get this idea, well, the best thing for me to do would just to be get up there and to wing it. And oh my goodness, that is not good. The speaker then tends to focus on their own loss, their own feelings, and it really becomes about them rather than the individual who's died. And sometimes people, they don't have the decorum for the moment. And they will say things that are inappropriate, and they will tell inappropriate stories about wild and crazy things that the individual did in their life. I had a funeral one time where I did not allow a eulogy, thankfully, and we were putting the body into the hearse afterwards, and one of the pallbearers looks at me and says, kids, maybe plug your ears, that guy was an effing legend. Only he didn't say effing. He dropped the bomb right there. It's just not appropriate. It's not the right thing to be saying at that time. And there is a fine line between a speech and a hostage crisis. And yeah, I do get that there's an irony in a preacher saying that. But hopefully the preacher has the skill to take a speech and make it go in a direction. And a lot of times in eulogies, when people get up and they start speaking, there is no direction and it just swirls and it's out of control and you're just there waiting. So, is it wrong to have a eulogy? Bible doesn't say so, so I'm going to go with no, it's not wrong. But there are some things that we definitely want to avoid. We want to make sure that we have the right emphasis. We want to make sure that we have good theology, and we want to make sure that we perform well. So here are some tips. If you're ever asked to do a eulogy, to be successful in that task. And I won't be snarky and say, just say no. But seriously, if you're ever asked to do a eulogy, here are some things to think about. 1, don't deify the deceased. There's this temptation to just all of a sudden make the person into the most holy saint ever. They weren't. Otherwise, they wouldn't have died. Let the person be the person, and let Jesus be great, a wonderful Savior. 2, share the important aspects of the person. There are things that are worth remembering about the people who go before us. And it's good to know some of those stories, but focus on what's important for kind of everybody. Not just for you, but what was important about that individual. 3, speak about his or her faith and the impact that Jesus had in their life, the witness of their life, their testimony. Point people to Jesus as you're talking, and you're using this person's story as the context to point to the true content of a funeral. If you're asked to do a eulogy, number 4, write it. Don't wing it. At a bare minimum, create an outline of the points that you want to cover. One of the things that's helpful if you have a written eulogy, I've had people who have gotten up and they're giving it, They become so emotionally overwrought that they actually can't give it. Well, it's there, it's printed. I read it. But writing it also helps you to condense your thoughts. It helps you to limit yourself. It helps you to make sure that you're pointing things in the right direction. Number 5, important things to do if you want to have a successful eulogy: practice. Practice. You only get one shot at this. Make sure that you do it well by practicing. And number 6, and this is more for the family than for the person who's putting together a eulogy, don't have an open mic night. If you're going to have a eulogy, have 1, maybe 2. Make sure that they're well prepared. But don't just have people, would anybody like to come up and talk? It is not something that's good or healthy, and it doesn't go well. Funerals are times of complex emotions. And when people get up in those times, they're generally not at their best, and they tend to not perform at their best. And in a funeral, it's important to keep the focus on the message that gives hope, that points people to the life that actually overcomes death. And so that means that we're really about focusing on the salvation that Jesus has won for us as our crucified, risen, and returning Lord. So I want to resist the urge to have a eulogy that praises the person, because all praise, honor, and glory actually belongs to Jesus and his Father in glory. And that's what funerals are really all about: pointing people to their Creator, their Redeemer, and their Savior, and looking at the person who has died as the context of a story of salvation that says that what they've been given in the afterlife, what they've been given toward a resurrection, can be yours too, because Jesus died and rose for you. I hope this has been helpful for you. If it has, please like it, share it, help other people to find it, and come back next week when we're going to be kind of starting to get ready for Christmas. Have a blessed week.